I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know that participants will continue to trickle in, but we wanted to, start the way that we intend to present, and kick off with something to use the time while we're here together. And here's why we're here.
So today we're going to take stock of what it means to be engaged. And we're going to start with a bit of a thought experiment. So everyone, get comfy in your chairs, take a deep breath, have a sip of water. And I want you to think of, sort of review the last 24 hours of your life and think of an instance, even if it was just a few minutes, where you were most engaged, where you were totally dialed in, you were attentive, you were switched on, you were present. So take a second to think of that. When in the last 24 hours, if you've got to go back further than that, that's fine.
Should I intervene with mine while people are
I have a few questions to ask first. So think of that. When were you absolutely engaged? So what caught your attention about this situation? What sort of dialed you in? What was the environment like? Where were you? What was happening? What time of day was it? How long did it hold your attention? And are you still thinking about it? Did it stick with you? Or was it just an isolated moment? So yes, now if you want.
Well, for me, I mean, I can name this easily. It was a call with someone who is a potential hire at our company. And we had this interesting moment where we were talking about the difference between what is urgent and what was important. And it was something that just so happened he was talking about with someone earlier that day. And we really kind of got each other, I felt, in that moment. The conversation had a lot of flow. I mean, it was right after lunch, or maybe it was right after coffee break. So I was uninterrupted. I was caffeinated. I was fed. And, I think also it was important that there was a lot at stake, both for this person and for myself. Like, it was an important conversation.
All right, good. Does anyone else want to share? I know we've got Heather.
Got it in the chat, or you can unmute and feel free to share your story.
So Heather says she was creating an animated video, and that held on to her.
Heather's unmuted.
I can, if I'm happy to share. So for me, it's when I get a chance to get super creative and am really engaged in the content, get to play and do things where I can step back and go, well, that's pretty cool. So the day-to-day minutia doesn't always grab me, but that does.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity.
Anybody else? You can put it in the chat or you can unmute. Okay, well, I think, and pop in if you want to, there's still lots of room in the chat if you want to share. But I think the takeaway from that is that as learners and as teachers and trainers both, we get frustrated when we're not engaged or someone else isn't engaged, when someone is distracted, when they're not present, when they're not switched on. But we don't often step back and say, okay, what about that situation? What about that learning environment? What about the content that we were delivering or how we were delivering it? What about that caused people to be disengaged? And what can we do to flip that? So we're going to spend today sort of looking at all kinds of different things that cause people to not be switched into something, and present some solutions too. So it's all about achieving presence, attention, and about being able to reflect on it afterwards too and see what worked and what didn't. All right, so you probably want to know a little bit about us. My name's Amy, and I am co-founder of Enable Education, and I'm also founder of our sister company, Red Tea Media. I spent a couple of decades as an educator in the classroom myself, before we decided to embark on an entrepreneurial journey. So Red Tea basically makes materials and multimedia materials for children that teach them how to think instead of what to think. And I hang my hat on that concept all the time. And at Enable, I basically, take what I learned in the classroom, being in front of learners, what worked and what didn't. And I apply that to mostly corporate and industrial training. How do I take what I learned teaching, K to 20 students and put that into the context of adult learners?
And I'm Ben. I'm the other co-founder of Enable Education. My background, I came from a software development world, and when we launched Enable, we found really quickly that we as a group were really great at teaching complex topics, a lot of technical topics to people. And for 15 years, that's what Enable has been doing. Certainly, there are a number of trends that we've discovered, not the least of which was blended learning, that there's a goal for massively scalable learning. And you can achieve that with self-paced e-learning, but that it's not sufficient. That at the end of the day, live training is a necessary part of the training puzzle. And another thing that we discovered, which is going to be a common theme in this conversation, is these poor souls who are tasked with training more often than not are not trained to be trainers. They themselves are subject matter experts. And you throw a pandemic into the mix and you send us all into our living rooms, or in this case, our dining room. And you really make that situation much more difficult. So this conversation that we're having today is the part of a series that we've done. Previously, we talked about methods of measuring training effectiveness, and you'll actually see on the resource tab on the side, there's the slide deck. A handout from that is available if you want to download that for your own references. But there's a reality that training has just become really complex. And we found that there are two main problems that need to be addressed before you can really move on and have great impact to your corporate learning. And those are, number one, measuring the training effectiveness, which was last week's talk, and increasing learner engagement, which is what we're here to talk about with you today. We used a story last week, the story of Harriet and Ed, and I'm just going to rehash that story really quickly. Harriet is a learning and development professional. So she works at a company and there's a big product launch and a whole bunch of new people, and she needs to train them up. Now, she herself is not a product expert, so she accesses the resources she has. Everybody's busy, except for one guy. His name is Ed. Ed is a technical expert, 30 years with the company, had played a pivotal role in this product, but he's not a trainer, and he's about to retire. So she taps Ed and says, Ed, can you do this thing? Can you help me out? Ed does the best he can. And the first thing he does is he tries to distill 30 years of knowledge and tons of documentation and technical facts into a very long slide deck. He presents it. He shows up on Zoom for a half-day training course, and crickets. So the attendees are really struggling. One brave soul finally raises their hand and says, I'm in marketing. I don't understand a word you're saying. So Ed realizes he needs to pivot, takes a breath and turns it into a question and answer session, and allows the attendees to drive the conversation and for him to be there as a resource for them. He retires, and what is the one thing he leaves behind for Harriet in this whole situation? The 300 slide deck. So we're expanding on that story this week. And so the story that's going to carry us through our conversation is Harriet now has to reteach the course. She still doesn't have anyone to access, but she thinks she's ready to go because she's got this slide deck. She opens up the deck and realizes, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what most of this means. And I just can't believe Ed was successful and got these great reviews by reading the thing. So she doesn't know what Ed did to make it engaging. She doesn't really know how to design or teach a course, let alone one that's online. Her audience, she knows, is from a bunch of different departments and a bunch of different levels of skill. So she's got to decide how to make it stick.
And basically, Harriet really doesn't know what her role is as a trainer. She doesn't know why she's there. If she's got this giant slide deck, is she just really a conduit? Is she just a delivery person? Here's all this giant blob of information, all these years of experience in a very long PowerPoint presentation. Do I just give these to people? Am I just a delivery person? She doesn't really know, could the learners get through this material on their own? Could she just put it somewhere and let them access it? And if so, why is she there? What's she doing? So is she supposed to be the subject matter expert? Is she supposed to be a facilitator? Is she supposed to just be a monitor and make sure that people show up and read it and, so she can check the box? Not knowing why you're there, what your role is, what you're supposed to be doing as a facilitator or a trainer, is a recipe for disengagement. It's a really good invitation for people to tune out and leave. Um, so if it's really just about delivering things, if it's just about putting a check mark beside someone's name, giving them a badge, why not just make a video and stick it up on an LMS somewhere, put a little quiz with it. But a check mark doesn't cut it anymore. Where, as things have been changing during the pandemic, I think it's become very clear that we need to know how to adapt. Part of learning and training and becoming a better employee, or better in your chosen field, is knowing how to pivot, how to actually think. And remember, before I said I hang my hat on the idea that it's more important to know how to think than what to think. What to think is good, but it's not enough anymore. So Harriet's really got to do some soul searching as a trainer and figure out, well, what's my role here? What am I supposed to be to these people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's only fair that we talk about why we are here today. I'm going to speak a little bit for you and say, we're here to share our passion about education and learning, and to motivate. You can do this, whether you more closely identify with Ed or more closely identify with Harriet, or you've got this all figured out. You can do this. And this idea of training effectively, it's important, it's necessary. We're also here to share our stories, and we could just give you a PDF with a bunch of tips and tricks, but we want to contextualize our thoughts and be here to answer questions and put things in context for you. Again, how to think, not what to think. So let's take a moment now. I want you each to take a minute. If you got pen and paper, you got a notepad on your computer, you got your phone open, whatever. Doodle, graph. If you want to, you can interpretive dance. We'll turn the camera, ask you to turn the camera on for that for sure. But think for a minute on why are you here today? And I would be so thrilled if a couple of you would be comfortable sharing in just a minute. So a minute is a long time, right? Is anyone willing to unmute and share why they're here today?
Sure. So I'm in a new role, and I'm going to be doing a lot more than just sort of required mandatory e-learning. And also, we're totally remote right now. We'll eventually be switching back to hybrid. So I need to do a lot of thinking, and I'm looking for some tips and things like that on how to engage workers in that hybrid environment. And, just looking to you guys for thoughts on that.
Wonderful, thank you. And I see Susanna has commented in the chat, having issues with the mic, same things as Heather, and Milan as well. Students at her institute or their institute are really struggling to keep up with all of their commitments. It feels like disengagement is at an all-time high.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate
Good.
that.
Good.
And Shan, please.
Very similar theme. We train entrepreneurs, and after 2 years of kind of the flat Zoom screen, I think everybody's had enough. So I'm searching for how do we do it better? How do we bring them back? Put some more excitement into it. So when I saw this, it was kind of the problem I'm seeing, and you framed it in exactly the right way that caught my attention.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. I appreciate that. And there's a little bit of a lesson there too. A minute of silence is a little hard to take as a presenter. Here we go.
Okay, so basically today we're going to look at some of the challenges that come in engaging people. What's difficult? So we'll start with a little bit of, we're going to basically be thinking about how we could guide Harriet if we were going to be a mentor or an advisor to her. What could we do today to help her do better? So, to deal with this giant chunk of information that she's been charged with getting into people's brains. So we're going to look at common pitfalls and challenges that cause learning disengagement, but we're going to also provide actionable pro tips to get over these things, to get past them. And there's no shame in these things coming up. It happens to everyone. That's part of being a trainer. So hands up or wave or something if this all sounds familiar to you. It sounds like some of you are already dealing with this. How about everybody else? Sound familiar? Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. So as this slide kind of indicates, there's really two buckets into which a lot of these challenges fall. One is related to what we call the online factor, and we've all heard the term of Zoom fatigue or staring at the screen, and we even just heard that a moment ago. Learning online is very different than learning in person. We're all just getting used to it, regardless of what side of the facilitation coin you're sitting on. But as you'll see, it's not totally out of our control, and there's tactics and strategies. And number two is kind of going back to that point that most people who are tapped with training or facilitating, they're not trained in training. So there's a lot of the same challenges that come up with creating a really great learning environment, whether or not you're online. So, kind of talking about this and surfacing some of the best practices in teaching and learning.
All right. So let's see. So let's ask people, how do you feel? Let's throw it back out there again. How do you feel when you are online all of the time? Let's share some of these challenges, and it can be how you feel, in your mind. It can be how you feel in your body. It can be emotional feelings. What does, being online all of the time, whether it's for work or whether it's, for socializing or, keeping in touch with people, how does it feel to be in a chair in front of a screen for lengthy periods of time?
I know I've learned what the piriformis muscle is.
Yeah.
Didn't know that before
and how to
COVID.
stretch things. So what are some of the challenges? And you can
just pop them into chat.
You can unmute, you can pop them into chat. What does it feel like to be online all the time? Okay, and we're getting some exhausted, drained. It takes a lot out of me. Tired of staring at the screen. Distracted, tired. Yeah, tired seems to be a common theme. Yeah. Well, there we go. Mixed, stagnant, but also, oh yeah, yeah. I feel that too, Milan. You're kind of wondering, okay, I'm stuck here in this house behind a screen. What's exciting that's going on in the outside world that I'm missing out on? And that's both exciting and a little bit, a little bit maddening.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm just going to give sort of a quick list of common complaints, common things that people are finding. We've never had to make eye contact as much as we do before. We are staring at each other all the time when we're online. And if we were in person, there'd be other things to look at, and, we could move around the room a little bit, we could fidget, but we are stuck staring into each other's faces. And it's not always bad. People are lovely, but that's weird. We don't have the same verbal and physical cues that we would have in person. So having a conversation with others feels very different online. I know I find myself talking over people all the time just because I'm not picking up on their physical signals on when to shut up. Having to be on all the time, there's nowhere to hide. And teachers talk about this all the time, that it's like you're a performer. Having to stay put and sit still is really hard, and hard on muscles. And we have to look at ourselves constantly. I don't know how many times I check my hair during a meeting online, but I know I didn't care about it that much when I was in person. And it's kind of like when you hear your own voice recorded and you sound like a different person. Seeing yourself on screen all the time, it's kind of weird. So that's not an exhaustive list. That's just some things. So you can address these in many ways, and you can mix it up. So things like doing check-ins. When you're training people, is everybody okay? Do we need to take a bathroom break? Do we need to stretch? And you have to encourage people to be very open and honest, so that it feels a little bit more normal, because this is what you would do in person. You can encourage people to move and stretch. You can have organized activities. We're going to get up and we're going to do this. Or, a little while ago, Ben and I put on music. We put on like a 1.5-minute long song so that we had to get up and move around. You can switch the speaker view around a little bit too. So maybe people aren't staring at themselves all the time. You can kind of block that. You can have minimal background. It's very important to decide what people are going to see behind you. And maybe, you decide how much or how little you want to tell people about yourself. You can hide self-view, and you can reduce full screen. So there's all kinds of little technical, tips that you can take to make it feel a little bit less like you're in a fishbowl and people are staring at you.
Thank you. This next topic, it's a little tongue in cheek, but I like it. Like, it's not all about you as the trainer and the facilitator. Switching to online learning is got to be more than just talking at people and talking through slide decks. And a lot of people would say that that's got nothing to do with this transition to distant working, that's always true. And there's an anecdote that says when you're training children, when you're teaching to kids, you get 1 minute of talking for every year of their age. So 5-year-olds, you get 5 minutes. 10-year-olds, you get 10 minutes. My theory is that once it hits 20, it starts counting down again.
It plateaus around 20. So very, very few adults can focus on anything, including someone speaking for more than 20 minutes. And I remember I have a very clear recollection of when I was doing training to teach adults. There was a 45-minute slide presentation about why you should not talk for more than 20 minutes at a time. So yeah, you have to drink your own Kool-Aid on that one.
For sure. And, I think that this transition to online or a blended or hybrid actually presents an opportunity to address some of these challenges that maybe we as the training industry weren't doing that well in the first place. And also, now there are tools, and there's a comfort level and an expectation that we're going to use tools that can help line some of these best practices up. Let's talk now a little bit about making it more about learners. So, let's now bring it back to the story of Harriet and remember what Harriet's doing. Harriet has to prep for a course where all she has is a massive slide deck left behind by a technical expert. How can we help her prep to feel that the people are there and they're an active part of the learning process, to give them a feeling of ownership, to feel that what they're learning matters, that someone has put energy and effort into conveying important pieces of information for them for their jobs. You don't feel that way when someone just talks through a slide deck forever at you. And to feel that learning itself is worthwhile. I mean, back to hanging our hats on wanting to support people on how to think, not just what to think. And there's all kinds of tools that can be used to support this. And we've got this little word cloud there that we can use to talk through some of them. For example, bringing up a poll now and then, driving home an interactivity, and also making them feel that it's about themselves. Storytelling. We've been weaving in this story of Harriet and Ed because, let's face it, anthropologically, we come and have been born out of a need for a verbal tradition, and that's how knowledge is transferred. So telling stories gets people and allows them, and in some cases requires them, to see the situation from their own world. Jokes. Do you have a good joke? I don't have a good joke. No, not on me? Okay. But there's all kinds of methods, and rather than going through each of them in great detail, I would love to hear, maybe in the chat or whatever, like what is one of these items that you'd either like to learn more about or you have yourself experienced real success with.
And this isn't an exhaustive list. If there's something on there that you use on a regular basis that works, fire it at us. I actually want to add another dad style jokes. That's good. I want to add just another little point to this. Being up there in front of a class, whether it's virtually or whether you're in person, is exhausting if all you're doing is talking at people. So, and a lot of educators and trainers don't realize this, but in giving it over to your learners, at least somewhat, it's actually less stressful. It's less effort. It's less exhausting. It's a revelation. You're not jumping up and down at the front of the room, trying to keep everyone's minds humming.
Yeah, a couple of people have commented on storytelling. that they've been yet to try it or they want to incorporate more. I will share with you, it sometimes feels counterintuitive, particularly as a technical individual, when I'm preparing content to weave story into it. But even for myself, I wear different hats in my role, and sometimes I'm helping to create training, and sometimes I'm wearing a business development role or getting people interested and excited in the kind of work that they can do or that we do. And if you can't see yourself in it, there's absolutely no drive to make changes. And let's face it, the purpose of all training is to drive people towards behavior change of some sort. I don't know if there's anything you want to comment on storytelling. You're the author.
It's a uniting factor. It shows your learners who you are as an instructor, and you're right. It gives them, this is an in. This is something about humans. It's not just a blob of bare facts. It's it's engaging and it's relevant.
Yeah. The other nice thing about storytelling is you can make up the scenario. That's kind of what it means. And so when you need to drive home a very specific point, you can actually manipulate the story so that it sets that scenario up. It can be really powerful when you're talking through scenarios that may not come up very frequently and you're having trouble getting people to relate to them. Okay, so let's move on to the next set of topics, which I'll hand over.
All right. Very early in my teaching career, it was in a high school situation. Here's a story. My principal said to me, and I came in sort of middle of the year. I was a new teacher. Someone else had gone on sick leave. And she said, start the way you mean to go. So getting momentum right away, coming in like a lion, is the thing to do. You really want to set the tone, and you want to establish that there's energy in this, and you want to show them right from the beginning, this is who I am, this is why we're here. So and if you teach little kids, you learn that if you don't do this, if you don't start out the year or the lesson the way you mean it to end, they'll eat you. And grown-ups are a little more polite about it, but they'll lose interest, they'll disengage. So you'll notice at the beginning of our presentation today, we had some trivia questions. We wanted to establish right from the beginning, that learning is cool and it's interesting and there's all these fun facts about it, that we have a little bit of a sense of humor about it, that we were trying to gauge, who you are and what you were interested in. So that works. Music works, even if you're waiting for people to come in and you have, something fun playing. They do that all the time in schools, even with little kids. I remember when my daughter was little, I volunteered in her kindergarten class, and in the morning they had Uptown Funk playing as all the little kids came in, and they loved it. It's really important to put an agenda or a checklist at the beginning so that everyone kind of knows where they are in the lesson, and tell them why you're there. Tell them why you care about this, why this is important to you, because that will come across.
Wonderful. So we want to do a real quick activity here, and not everyone has their cameras on, but that's okay. I want you to type yes in the chat if you're a doggy person.
Only one.
Do you live in the country? Do you have more than one sibling? Was math your best subject at school? It was for one of us. If you're a night owl, do you get cold easily? Now, these may seem like really silly questions, but it does demonstrate how diverse a group of learners we have. Even little things like this can really make a difference in the nature of the group that you have. And when you're online, you don't get to read people as easily as you would in person. And it's also true for distributed teams. You get to know each other better around the proverbial water cooler. Moving forward, when we're all working at a distance, decentralized, you don't get to know people as well. There's just no such thing as a typical learner. And this becomes especially evident in online learning, especially when your team or your learners aren't used to a virtual environment.
So we want to try a little experiment. We are coming to you from our dining room. We want to know what you learn about us from our background. So we're sitting in our dining room. What do you learn? What have you learned about us? What do you think you know about us?
Feel free to type in the chat or unmute, whatever you might have observed. We got thick skins. You can be judgmental if you like. maybe too small to see. I'm tempted to move the camera closer. But I can give a hint. There's some Lego back there. There's a handmade yarn rainbow dealie.
Rainbow, yeah. There's some antiques. There's, oh, look at this. It's really too small. But this is a transcript of that scene from Schitt's Creek where they're making enchiladas and they're doing cheese sauce. This is a fold in the cheese transcript.
So we know that this is a hypothetical activity, but you can really learn a lot from people, not just what's in the background, but sometimes what crawls across the foreground while they're
what tugs on someone's sleeve and asks for a snack. How many times the doorbell rings?
I thought the dogs would bark on cue for that one, but it didn't work out. And any activity that helps you learn about your learners is valuable. Partly because the best thing that as a trainer we can provide is variety, and as many different learning opportunities in different formats. It's really, really important. In a lot of situations, your learners, won't already know what works for them, especially if they're new to online learning. So you can't expect them to be that marketing dude in Ed's first course and raise their hand and say, I'm lost, I don't understand everything. We don't have that luxury. And sometimes even if you ask, they won't have the answers to give you.
Does that resonate with a lot of people? You find when you train, you can ask people, how do you learn best? And a lot of people in the room will be, so, it's not part of our curriculum. We're not taught it when we're growing up, and we don't get a whole lot of opportunities sometimes to reflect. Mm-hmm. So they won't know what to tell you. You have to figure it out.
And we can repeat the word cloud that we shared before that kind of walked through all these different concepts, these different ideas and tools that we can deploy. But I think it's really important to not just think of that in the context of changing what you do, but doing it in context to your audience and being sensitive and aware of the different needs that they may have for a whole variety of reasons. So we're just past the halfway point. Ooh, that's in my script and it's true too. That's awesome. I want to call out what we've done so far. So we talked about the why of training. We talked about life online. It's sometimes great and sometimes has challenges. We talked about how as a facilitator or as the instructional designer, it's not all about us. We talked about finding and maintaining that momentum of how you get started. And we talked about thinking about who's out there. So we want to bring the whole story, the whole situation back to Harriet. And think about what should Harriet do next? She's got this challenge. And I wonder if anyone's willing to share what you might recommend for Harriet. She's got a big slide deck. She's not a trainer. She's got nobody else to help her. What might you advise her to do?
That's good.
Think like a student.
Yep.
Thank you, Shan. Yeah, clarify what are her skills. What does she bring to the table? And Susanna wins a prize because that was one of the next topics. Congratulations. Anything else? Can she do something special? Yes.
It's kind of like, what Susanna is saying. It's kind of like, a kindergarten teacher who's like, oh, well, I happen to play the guitar, so I'm going to bring the guitar in,
We'll launch a little poll question here. Have you ever been in Harriet's situation? 100% yes. I'd never see that. Yeah. So I mean, obviously, this is a relatable situation that we're in, or that Harriet is in, and let's face it, that we are all in.
All right. So this is what we're going to hear, and this kind of relates to the question we just asked. We're going to have people coming into training online who say, but I'm not a trainer. I have no training to be a trainer. I have no experience of it. So there are things that you realize when you are put in this situation that you might not have realized before if you've never trained before. And one is, with Harriet's new big job, there's a big difference between creating learning content and delivering it. She, in the beginning, she created some, and Ed, Ed delivered it. He figured it out. And then Ed gave her this big blob and she has to figure out how to deliver it. So there's so much more to training in general, but particularly training online, than just delivering large quantities of information. The slide deck is not enough. Maybe it never was. For Ed, people like Ed, he realized, on his feet in the classroom, there is a big difference between being an expert in your field and training others to be an expert. So you can be a genius and have no idea how to impart that to other people. It's very, very difficult to bottle lightning, to distill something into a form that you can pass around. And all of us are realizing that there is a big difference between teaching in person and teaching online. And I'm sure a lot of trainers are feeling, I have decades of experience in front of people, and I feel like I am completely starting from ground zero. I have to build from the bottom again. Okay, so teaching is its own profession with its own set of unique skills. I think that's becoming very, very clear. And it can feel very lonely, especially if you're online. And I think any online trainer, especially in the last 2 years, will tell you that it does sometimes feel like you're on your own, especially if people elect to turn off their cameras and their mics and they're not particularly keen to share. It feels like you are it is a solitary profession, and it can be quite daunting.
Yeah, and so the summary is call for backup, and oftentimes there's a challenge, and this was the case for Harriet as well. She only has so many resources that she can access, and I think it's important to emphasize that getting help and leveraging the skill set that you might have and others have doesn't necessarily have to be inefficient. It can be done effectively. There is, and we can speak from experience here, there's a tremendous amount of energy and effort spent in preparing for and following up after training. The training itself usually is relatively short in the grand scheme of things. And if you leverage your subject matter experts really efficiently, you don't have to have them do the whole thing the whole time. You can even pull in guest speakers into a conversational event and have them be there just for part of the time. Make your attendees aware that they're going to be there. Right after lunch, we're going to have Ed. We've called him in from retirement. We've lured him with some donuts and coffee, and we get an hour with Ed. So get your questions ready. And it can be a really powerful thing to do. And to the comment earlier about someone who happens to play the guitar, like pull someone in who has that skill set. But let's face it, Harriet's been tasked with doing this. She's got to make it happen. She's responsible for the end result. But asking for help in an efficient way, where you're not just saying, oh, my hands are up, I don't know what to do, can be something that is a winning solution for everyone. And also, if this is a problem that recurs, if this situation happens over and over again, there's value in training facilitators to be facilitators and have that be their role. They don't have to be subject matter experts. A great facilitator is worth their weight in gold for these kind of events when they can pull in people like Ed as needed. They can be generalists, and they can really drive for an efficient use of a team's resources. So, kind of expanding on this concept of efficiency, I want to talk about technology. And this comes to play, and it's a favorite topic of mine. I mean, it's not a surprise. It's what we do at Enable, a big part of it. It boils down to really two things: friction and habits, and the way these things interplay. Talking about habits, people a lot of the time prefer to read books on paper. People still don't necessarily like their e-reader. And why? It's just a familiarity. It's a habit. So we need to be aware that digital transformation has happened. There's no unringing this bell, ever. But people still have habits and preferences. And when there is friction in the use of a piece of technology, people will bristle and people will have challenges. So, how do we make everything easier and not just match the state of pre-pandemic learning, but improve on it? I think we've identified pretty clearly that there's tremendous room for opportunity. At the end of the day, people like or dislike a book because it is a good book. They may have a preference, but it's also not okay just to assume that people will like it more because it's an e-reader. And you can't assume people will be better engaged because you use Zoom and you have breakout rooms. It still needs to be very, very thoughtful.
Right now, people are, you're probably thinking, well, I don't know how to do this. And, it's a challenge to go online and, to get a little bit meta here. I don't know if anyone remembers the old Palmolive commercials where someone's in a nail salon and they've got their hands in this green goo and they're chatting away about, how awesome, Palmolive is and how it's moisturizing to your skin. And then at the end, the person doing her nails says, you're already soaking in it. So we're already soaking in this. We're already there. And it's just recognizing, how to get comfortable with it.
Yeah, and part of both the trainer and, Harriet's wearing both hats, but the trainer and the person who's creating and designing the training, part of their job is to teach good habits. And the way I think that we teach really anything most effectively is by modeling it ourselves. And my hope is that in this presentation, we are presently modeling some of these behaviors that you can take away for your own use. And so, talk about tech solutions. I'm not going to give you one answer. There is no magic bullet, although we are going to talk a little bit about the Sidekick platform. But to be realistic, there are tons of options out there, and they're not all going to be effective. It depends a lot on your learners, your topic, your trainers, what's accessible to them. But I think it's really important that we meet people in the middle. That and by that I mean we learn what works for them and we move towards that. That we don't just dictate and say, here's the way it will be, and you must follow along. That we hear and we listen. That we pivot and seek feedback and make real change based on it. The goal is to teach people to learn in this new way, in this different way. And back to your line.
How to think, not what to think.
Yeah. So I want to take this moment to wrap up the key takeaways. We've already been through, the why of training, life online, that it's not all about us as facilitators, that we need to find and maintain that momentum and kind of start the way that we want to go. Know who's out there and leverage resources, call for backup when needed, and really discover the tech that works best for the situation. Well, I think I'd love to wrap up a little bit. You may have observed we're in this platform called Sidekick, which is Enable's own product that we've launched. Our objective with this is to solve these online learning challenges that are related to live learning. LMSs and self-paced learning isn't sufficient to the task. So our objective is to provide a platform that makes it easy to measure the effectiveness of learning and drives up engagement and makes it really quite simple for the person who's creating the content and the person who's delivering the content to have an effective experience. Our ask of you is to become a trial user. There's a link on the resources side there for an Eventbrite page where on February 10th, we're going to do a full demo and walkthrough, and everyone who attends that will get a free trial of Sidekick to use for their own purposes. I've also included on the left-hand side a link to the PDF of this slide deck that we just walked through. And I just want to thank you again for your time. It's been our pleasure chatting with you. All right.
I just want to say, in case none of your learners have said this to you, thank you for putting in the effort and for keep on keeping on and for rolling ahead even though things are weird and we're still figuring things out. I think it's really important to thank our educators, to say that you are appreciated. We see you.
All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.